Hi. So my thesis today is basically isolation is an amplifier of suffering, not the source of it. I read a lot of articles about antinatalism, and in almost every single one, people talk about, especially naysayers of antinatalism, they talk about loneliness being the cause of antinatalism, when really it isn't. Um, so if you think about the opposite of isolation, you have basically community, family, that sort of thing. And those things is what Peter Zapf would call distraction or an anchor. They kind of move our mental energy away from thinking about life and about what life actually is. And that's thus my thesis. Isolation is an amplifier of suffering, not the source of it. So if you have a lot of time to think about things, life becomes suddenly very existential. You notice mental and physical decay. You notice that you have to satisfy desires and needs all the time. Whereas when you're around people, you're distracted. You constantly have something to focus on other than your existential state. Um, but if you and this is a modern thing. This is specifically modern, contemporary. Although there have been waves of loneliness in the past, so in the industrialization era where people moved to cities, they would they would move to cities and be stripped of their communal sort of foundations, and they would be lonely. Post World War II, there was another wave of loneliness in suburban North America, where you had homemakers, especially being sort of isolated and alone. Um, you had the 70s, the 50s, and the 70s, where there was the Malthusians. People contemplating the population bomb and whether or not it was worth there was isolation and whether it was worth bringing people into the world, things like that. So there have been waves of loneliness. Sorry if I got mixed up on the last point there, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Um, but the point is, if you lived 100 to 200 years ago, though, you would have much worse lives. You would have high infant mortality, unmedicated illness, dangerous working conditions. You would notice suffering much more, but it would be much more local and more intense. Plus, you would be around people, so you would suffer together, and that somehow makes it better, right? Um, but 100 to 200 years ago, you would notice like a lot more suffering, especially when it came to disease and medicine. Like you would notice a lot more suffering. Um, Now, in contemporary life, in the 2000s and right now, especially after COVID as well, we have loneliness and isolation, but access to social media. So social media was supposed to create connection, but it creates low depth connection, and it constantly feeds our appetite for suffering and all that stuff in the world. So our nervous systems weren't built to handle all that information about suffering all across the world all at once. So we we contemplate our existential state in the world, and thus antinatalism is kind of not born but kind of emphasized, right? We're suddenly aware of suffering more than we would have been. um, but I think what Benatar would argue is that what's actually being established is a baseline of human suffering. Whether you lived 100 or 200 years ago or you live now, there's a baseline of human suffering. And I think one focus was placed on the hedonic treadmill, where you have a desire, there's friction to satisfy that desire. The desire gets satisfied, and then a new desire pops up. So that's something that's intrinsic to humanity. It's how we function, and it doesn't matter if you're lonely or not lonely. That's how that works. Um, so my point in all of this is to say that antinatalism deals with human suffering, and loneliness is just another form of suffering. Loneliness, isolation, how whatever you want to call it, is just another form of suffering. It's not the cause of antinatalism. It's not it's not why antinatalism exists. Um, there's many types of suffering out there, and we experience as human beings all together. We experience them all. Um, so yeah, antinatalism is just noticing that that suffering takes place, and if you weren't born, you don't have to live through any of it. Um, None of it is relevant to you because you don't exist. Um, so that's all antinatalism is saying. It might sound simple coming from me, especially. It's simple, but I don't see why the simplicity of an idea is necessarily making it false. Um, but that's all I gotta say. Bye.